it's good to have you here as the night settles. Somewhere in the quiet folds of your brain, a moment can arrive twice. Once, as it happens, and once, faintly, as something you are certain you already dreamed. The room fits too well. The words land in an order you seem to have heard before. For a heartbeat, it feels as though sleep handed you tomorrow ahead of time. Why would a mind do that to itself? Let the day loosen. You rest inside a mind that files this moment the way it files an old dream. Softly, a half-beat late. Welcome to Sleepy Science Fact. Tonight, we go looking for why the mind trusts a dream that seems to have arrived first. You have walked into a room and felt the walls arrive a half-second before you did, as though you had stood there once inside a dream you never wrote down. It is one of the most ordinary strange things a human mind produces. The room is new. The sense of having already seen it is not. Nothing in the doorway has changed. Something in the way you are recognizing the doorway has. Tonight we stay with that overlap, the narrow place where something old in memory and something happening right now seem to land in the very same instant. And underneath everything we look at sits one quiet question. Why does the brain make us believe we can see the future through our dreams? The experience has a name, and the name is a small confession. Déjà Rêvé is French for already dreamed, and it entered clinical writing the way its older cousin did. Through neurologists listening to patients try to describe something they had no good words for. Déjà Vu means already seen. Déjà Rêvé means the recognition points somewhere stranger, not to a place you visited, but to a night you slept through. The distinction matters because it is the one the person makes themselves, in the moment, without being taught it. Nobody has to explain the difference to you. Your mind hands you the label and the certainty together, already sealed, before you have had a chance to ask it anything at all. Whatever this is, it does not stay long enough to be examined. The related experience of déjà vu, which researchers have measured far more carefully, is typically described as lasting somewhere in the range of seconds rather than minutes. Brief enough that by the time you turn your attention toward it, it has already thinned out. Déjà Rêvé behaves the same way in the accounts people give. The feeling arrives whole, holds for a breath, and then withdraws, leaving only the memory of having felt it. You are left holding a report of an event rather than the event. Every mind that has tried to catch this has come away with the same empty hands you did. Here is the part that unsettles people, and it is worth saying plainly. Déjà Rêvé does not feel like remembering. Remembering has a texture. You reach. You retrieve. You can usually say roughly when. This arrives already finished. The certainty comes first, fully formed, and only afterward do you go looking for the dream it is supposed to belong to. The order is reversed from ordinary recall. You are not pulling something up. You are being handed a verdict and asked to find its evidence. That reversal is the whole shape of the experience. And it is why the word people reach for is almost never remembered. the word they reach for is new. If this has happened to you, you are standing in a very crowded room. Every survey anyone has ever taken of this family of experiences comes back the same way. Not a rare condition, not a marking, but a common feature of ordinary human minds, distributed across countries and languages and centuries of people quietly wondering whether to mention it. We will come back to exactly how crowded that room is later tonight, when the number will mean more than it does now. The thing you may have half suspected made you unusual turns out to be one of the most widely shared oddities we have. Déjà Rêvé specifically has been surveyed far less, and the numbers we have should be held loosely. Survey work by Arthur Funkhauser and Michael Schredel, published in the International Journal of Dream Research, found that a very large majority of respondents reported having experienced it. Though their samples leaned heavily towards students and people already interested in dreams, a later online survey, far larger, landed closer to 4 in 5. These are self-reports about a feeling that lasts seconds, which is close to the hardest thing to measure honestly. So the number is soft. The finding underneath it is not. This is common, and most people who have it a handful of times a year rather than daily. The difference between the two experiences is not in the feeling, but in where the feeling points. In Déjà Vu, the sense of familiarity attaches to the place or the moment itself, and the mind says, "I have been here." In Déjà Rêvé, that same familiarity comes with an address attached, and the address is a dream. "I have been here" becomes "I dreamed this." Same brief certainty, same absence of supporting detail, but one of them makes a claim about the past, and the other makes a claim about the night before, or a year ago, or some night you cannot name. 2 doors in the same wall, opening onto very different rooms. What people actually describe, when they slow down enough to describe it, is a layering. The moment in front of them is completely present, in full detail, and something else appears to be resting on top of it, thin as a second exposure on film. Not a picture, not a scene you could draw. A fit. The sensation that the present has slotted into a shape that was already there waiting for it. That word, fit, comes up again and again in accounts, and it is doing real work. It suggests that what is being matched is not a picture against a picture, but a lived moment against something older that was already carrying the shape of a moment. Then there is the shiver, and nobody has to be prompted to mention it. A small, cool run down the back, a lift at the arms, a half second where the ordinary temperature of the room changes. It is not fear, and people are careful about that when they describe it. It is closer to being addressed. The body registers something before the mind has settled on what happened, and the body's report arrives first. You did not decide to feel it. You could not have declined it. Whatever ran through you in that half second was the body filing its report before the mind had finished deciding what there was to report, which is the order these things always come in. Notice what has already been established, because it changes the question. the certainty arrives before any evidence for it. The body responds before the mind has a verdict. And the experience ends before it can be inspected. Whatever déjà rêvé is, it cannot be the mind carefully checking the present against a catalogue and reporting a match, because there is no time for checking and no catalogue on offer. So the question we opened has already turned slightly on its axis. It is no longer only why we believe we can see ahead. It is why recognition, of all things, is the feeling that shows up wearing so much certainty and carrying so little proof. It also turns out that Déjà Rêvé is not one experience wearing one name. Working from the accounts of patients in neurological care, Jonathan Curo and colleagues, in a 2018 paper in Brain Stimulation, argued that the term had been covering at least 3 distinct things that happen to feel alike from the inside. Their point was taxonomic and careful. People saying the same 3 words. I dreamed this. Were describing experiences with different textures and different degrees of specificity. Before you can ask what causes something, you have to know how many somethings you are holding. That is not a technicality. It is the difference between explaining a thing and explaining the wrong thing beautifully. The first of the 3 is the sharpest, and it is the one people tell stories about. Curo's group called it the episodic type. The present moment matches a specific dream, one the person can place, one they could say something about. Last Tuesday, the dream about the corridor. There is a felt date attached, and content, and the sense that the file being pulled has edges. This is the version that generates the good stories, the ones told at kitchen tables and then told again. It is also the least common of the 3 in the accounts, which is worth sitting with, because it is the version almost everyone thinks of when they hear the phrase. The second type is softer and, quietly, the more familiar one. Curo's group described a familiarity variety, in which the present matches something dreamlike without matching a dream. There are fragments. A quality of light, a mood, the arrangement of a space, the sense of having moved through something built this way before. But no night to pin it to. No story around it. Nothing you could tell someone without watching your own account thin out as you speak. This is the version that rarely gets told, precisely because there is so little to tell. Most people who have felt this have felt exactly this, and assumed, in the absence of evidence, that they were the ones being imprecise. The third type is the strangest to describe and the oldest in the medical literature, where it has long been called a dreamy state. Here the match is not to any dream in particular. The waking moment itself takes on the quality of dreaming while you remain fully awake inside it. The room stays where it is. The light does not change. But the register of the whole scene shifts, the way a familiar street can look staged. People reach for words like film, or watching, or being slightly behind. It is not confusion, and they insist on that. They know where they are. The knowing has simply arrived wearing the wrong texture. 3 types, 1 word, and that mismatch explain something you may have felt in a conversation without being able to name. When two people say, "I get déjà rêvé," they may not be describing the same event at all. One means a dated dream that came true in a doorway. One means a fog of familiarity with no date in it. One means the afternoon briefly felt like something being dreamed. They will nod at each other, and both will be slightly wrong about what the other means. The single word makes the experience feel more mysterious than it is by pouring 3 different rivers into one channel and asking us to explain the flood. Listen to how people actually talk about it, and you can hear the language failing in real time. The sentences start confidently and then hedge. I dreamed this becomes. I think. I dreamed this becomes. I don't know. It felt like I dreamed it. The retreat happens in a single breath. What is being reported is a feeling of high confidence about a claim the speaker cannot support. And most people notice the gap while their own sentence is still in the air. That embarrassment is nearly universal. And it is one of the quiet reasons this goes unmentioned. The mind offers a certainty. Language asks it for receipts. The certainty has none. The trigger is almost always beneath notice. And this is one of the most consistent things in the accounts. Not weddings. Not disasters. A doorway. A sentence arriving mid-conversation. The particular tilt of afternoon light across a kitchen counter. The moment Déjà Rêvé chooses is nearly always a moment nothing was riding on, which is part of what makes it feel so pointed. If the mind were manufacturing prophecy, you would expect it to aim at the important hours. Instead, it lands on a Tuesday, on nothing, on the sound of someone setting down a cup. The smallness is not incidental. It is the most reliable feature of it. And any honest account has to explain why the machinery fires hardest on the hours that carry nothing at all. What gets matched is rarely a fact. It is a shape. People almost never report that Déjà Rêvé handed them information. A name, a number, a thing they could check. What they report is a configuration. The way people were standing. The way a sentence and a gesture and a room fit together into a single moment. That is a clue about what kind of thing is being compared. Whatever old material the present is landing against. It is not stored as a list. It is stored as the shape of an experience. And a moment, by nature, has a shape long before it has any facts in it. There is an asymmetry here that almost nobody escapes, and it is worth naming. You are certain you dreamed this. Ask yourself what else was in that dream, and you have nothing. Not the beginning. Not who was there. Not the night. The certainty covers exactly the piece of dream that overlaps the present moment and stops precisely at that edge, like a beam of light with no room around it. Real remembered dreams do not behave this way. They come with wreckage, loose ends, things that make no sense. This one is trimmed to fit. It is as though the certainty arrived already the size of the moment it was explaining. And so the honest question, the one most people arrive at eventually, and then quietly set down. Did I really dream this? Or do I only now believe that I did? It cannot be answered from the inside. There was no witness. Nothing was written down. The only record of the dream is a feeling that appeared after the moment it claims to predict. Most people find this thought and then let it go, because it is genuinely uncomfortable to hold, and because nothing follows from it that helps. But almost everyone who has had this experience has had that thought too. You are not the first person to distrust your own certainty here. Given all that, reaching for prophecy is not foolish. It is nearly forced. A mind is handed a certainty with no source, attached to a moment that is happening now, and the only available explanation that accounts for both halves is that you saw this coming. It is the most economical story. It is also the story a mind can tell in the half-second it has before the feeling fades. People who conclude they dreamed the future are not being careless. They are doing exactly what minds do with a strong signal and no context, which is to build the smallest bridge that carries the weight. That reflex is not a personal failing. It is standard equipment. Most of this goes unsaid, and that is perhaps the loneliest part. People do not mention Déjà Rêvé over dinner, because they can hear how it will sound, and because the vocabulary collapses halfway through the sentence. So millions of people have this experience a few times a year and file it privately, each one faintly suspecting they are the strange one. Meanwhile, the person across the table is filing an identical experience with an identical suspicion. The silence is doing the work here, not the rarity. Nothing about this is unusual, except how rarely it is spoken. You have been keeping a secret that nearly everyone in the room is also keeping. So consider where this has come to rest. It is common. It is brief. It arrives as certainty rather than recall. It is triggered by the smallest possible moments, matched by shape rather than fact, trimmed to exactly the size of the present. And it comes in at least 3 recognizable varieties that a clinician can tell apart. Those are not the properties of a message. They are the properties of a process, and a regular one. The question we started with is beginning to move. Perhaps it was never about whether the dream saw ahead. Perhaps it is about what is happening in the moment of recognition itself. A moment we have been treating as a window when it may be a machine. One last thing about the experience before we go beneath it. You cannot summon it. No one has ever reported bringing on Déjà Rêvé by wanting it. And people have tried, sitting in the same doorway, waiting for the same light. It comes when it comes, entirely unbidden, and it leaves without discussion. Whatever produces it is not taking instructions from you, which means it was running before you noticed and continued after you stopped attending. The most vivid, most personal, most seemingly meant for you experience in your week arrived without your involvement at all. It was never something you were doing. It was something that happened in you. And this is where the surface ends. Everything we have laid out is what the experience is like. The doorway, the shiver, the certainty without receipts, the 3 varieties, the honest doubt underneath. All of it is testimony. None of it explains anything. and testimony has taken us as far as testimony goes. But a phenomenon this regular, this consistent across strangers who have never compared notes, is not a mood. Regularity implies machinery. Somewhere beneath the moment your body registered before you understood it, something was actually happening. In tissue, in timing. The next stretch of the night goes down there, into the part of you that decided you had dreamed this. If the drift has already started, stay where you are. But if you are still with me, a subscribe helps this reach someone lying awake at 2 a.m, wondering whether the thing they felt in a doorway last week means something is wrong with them. It does not. Thank you for spending part of your night here. Just above your ear, on each side, sits a hippocampus, a curved ridge of tissue named for the seahorse it resembles. You have 2, one folded into each temporal lobe, each about the length of your little finger. It does not hold your memories the way a drawer holds paper. It bends. It stitches a place, a fudge, a smell, and a moment into one retrievable whole, then hands the pieces back to the cortex that first sensed them. Every memory you have ever recognized passed through this small curl of tissue. It is working right now, filing this sentence as you hear it. The hippocampus does not sit alone. Wrapped around it is the Rhinal cortex. Into Rhinal, peri-rhinal, para-hippocampal, the corridor through which nearly all information reaches it. Almost nothing enters a memory without passing this way, and almost nothing returns without passing through again. Neuroscientists often call the entorhinal cortex the gateway, because it is the last stop before the hippocampus and the first stop after. That architecture matters tonight, quietly. A corridor is a place where things can be delayed. It is also a place where a signal can arrive perfectly intact, and the room it was meant for can simply fail to answer. That corridor you just heard about, the one every memory has to walk through twice, once going in and once coming back, is carrying this sentence right now, and you cannot feel a thing. Let that be the whole of it for a moment. The work is silent. Nothing about binding a room to an hour announces itself. It happens somewhere below any sensation you could locate. In tissue, the length of your little finger, on both sides of your head, while your shoulders go heavier and your breathing lengthens without being asked. You do not have to attend to it. It has never once needed you to. Let your breath go long. From here, we go further under, into the part of you doing this. Recognition is not one thing. In 1994, in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, Andrew Yonelinas plotted recognition data as receiver operating characteristics, hits against false alarms, and found it behaves like 2 processes rather than 1. Recollection brings back the surroundings. Where? When? Who else was in the room? Familiarity brings only a strength, a bare verdict of known, with no scene attached to it. You have felt both. The friend's name that arrives whole, and the stranger's face that merely glows. dual process theory has been argued over for 3 decades. But the split itself now sits in the mainstream of memory science. The 2 processes can be pulled apart, and the brain shows where the seam runs. Patients whose damage is largely confined to the hippocampus tend to lose recollection while familiarity survives. They know a face is known, but cannot say from where. Patients whose damage falls instead in the perirhinal and entorhinal cortex, sparing the hippocampus, show the mirror image. Familiarity fades while recollection holds. Leading dual process accounts read this as 2 circuits. Neighbors in the same corridor, running partly separate jobs. Which means the feeling of knowing and the retrieval of the source were never a single act. They can come apart in an undamaged brain too. Here is the strange consequence. Familiarity is not a memory. It is a signal, a computed judgment of how strongly the present matches something the system has handled before, delivered to you as a feeling rather than a picture. It arrives with no address on it. Nothing in the signal itself says which night, which street, which dream. When the signal runs strong and the source stays silent, you are left holding certainty without evidence. This happened before, and I cannot tell you when. That arithmetic runs constantly, all day. It is running on this sentence now, and returning nothing worth mentioning, which is why the rare loud verdict feels like it came from somewhere else. In 2002, the neurologist Joseph Spatt proposed in the Journal of Neuropsychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences that déjà experiences may come from that split. A faulty, isolated familiarity signal rising out of the parahippocampal system while the rest of memory carries on working normally. The rhinal cortex says known, and the hippocampus, working perfectly, reporting honestly, says there is nothing there. Spatt's point is that déjà vu is not a failure of retrieval. It is 2 healthy systems disagreeing, and you standing between them. It is a hypothesis, not a settled fact, and the field still argues the details. But it describes something you already know from the inside: how a moment can feel remembered and unfindable at the same instant. The oldest mechanical story is about timing. In 1963, in the journal Brain, Robert Efron studied temporal perception in patients with temporal lobe injury and suggested that information reaches the temporal lobe twice, once directly, once by a slower route through the opposite hemisphere, milliseconds apart. If that second arrival lags too far behind, the argument runs. The brain may log one event as 2, something happening now, and something already on file. Efron's dual pathway model is more than 60 years old, and it remains contested rather than proven. But it named the suspect that the research keeps circling back to decade after decade. Delay. Delay only matters because your brain keeps no clock. Nothing in a memory carries a stamp reading Tuesday, or last April, or in a dream. The sense of when is reconstructed, inferred from how the trace feels, how easily it surfaces, how much detail rides along with it. a vivid fragment feels recent. A thin, fluent one feels old. This works well enough to run a life on. But it means pastness is a conclusion rather than a record. And a conclusion is something that can be reached on slender evidence. Every mind you have ever met is dating its own memories by feel. The date is not stored anywhere. It is produced on request, out of how it feels. Deeper in, the machinery gets more specific. In 2008, in Science, Arnold Backer and colleagues used high-resolution imaging of the human hippocampus and found that one region, the dentate gyrus and CA3, performs what is called pattern separation. It takes two closely similar experiences and forces them apart into distinct, non-overlapping codes. This is why your car in today's parking space does not overwrite yesterday's. Separation is expensive work, and it is not flawless. When two things resemble each other closely enough, the machinery has to rule one way or the other, same or different. Tonight's whole question lives inside that small decision. The opposite operation runs alongside it. In that same 2008 study, activity in CA1, the sub-IC-U-lum and the cortex around them leaned the other way, toward pattern completion, the trick of restoring a whole memory from a partial cue. 3 notes and the song returns. Half a face in a crowd and the name arrives. Completion is what makes memory usable at all. Without it, you would need the entire past in hand to recover any part of it. But a system built to make wholes out of fragments will now and then make a whole out of a fragment that never had one. Sleep is when the hippocampus talks to itself. In 1994, in Science, Matthew Wilson and Bruce McNaughton reported that the same populations of hippocampal cells that fired together while a rat crossed a particular place fired together again during the slow-wave sleep that followed, a re-expression absent from the sleep before. Neuroscientists call it replay. It runs in compressed bursts riding on sharp-wave ripples, faster than the original crossing ever was. Your hippocampus almost certainly did this last night, and will do it again within hours, running the day back, in pieces, in the dark, without ever asking your permission. Replay is not idle. In a 2010 review in Nature Reviews Neuroscience, Stefan Diekelman and Jan Born described what is now called active systems consolidation during deep sleep, slow oscillations, spindles, and hippocampal ripples lock together. Memories are handed outward from the hippocampus to the neocortex for longer keeping. The night is a transfer, not a pause. And a transfer is a moving process. Traces are copied, thinned, recombined, and refiled while you are not there to supervise any of it. What you wake with is not quite what you laid down. It is what the night made of it. So, what is a dream made of? In 2003, in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience, Roar Foss, Magdalena Fosse, Alan Hobson, and Robert Stickgold reported that across nearly 300 sleep reports, about 65% held recognizable pieces of recent waking life, yet full episodic replay. An event returning as itself appeared in no more than 1 to 2%. Dreams are built from fragments. A face here, a corridor there, never the whole scene. Something has quietly shifted in what we can ask. If the machinery can manufacture the feeling of pastness with no source, and a dream never held a whole scene, then how complete can a match feel when only a fragment was ever there? You can also trigger these states with electricity. In 1963, in Brain, Wilder Penfield and Fanor Perot summarized 40 cases in which stimulating the temporal lobe of conscious patients during surgery evoked what they called experiential responses. A voice, a room, a scene from a life, vivid and yet known to be arriving inside an operating theatre. Only a small fraction of stimulations produced anything at all. In 1994, also in Brain, Jean Banco and colleagues studied 16 patients with what neurologists call the dreamy state, finding the anterior hippocampus involved in 83% of cases and the amygdala in 73%. Jean-Pierre Vignal's group mapped the same territory again in 2007. The feeling has an address. Then, in 2018, in the journal Brain Stimulation, Jonathan Curo and colleagues in Toulouse described something narrower still. Stimulating the medial temporal lobe of epilepsy patients evoked Déjà Rêvé, the experience of a prior dream. They gathered 7 cases of their own alongside 35 from the published literature, and estimated the phenomenon at roughly 3 in every 10,000 stimulations. Rare, but real, and reproducible with a current. A dream you were certain had come to you unbidden, delivered instead by a wire and a few milliamps. Whatever this feeling is, it lives in tissue that can be found, and it answers when that tissue is touched. Let your shoulders settle a little lower than they were. Whatever once arrived with that small cold shiver of recognition is tissue doing its filing. And it is filing this quiet moment too, gently, a half-beat behind. Every memory you hold arrives in 2 parts: what happened and where it came from. The psychologist Marcia Johnson gave the second part a name: source monitoring. She set it out in a 1993 review in Psychological Bulletin, written with Shahin Hashtrudi and D. Stephen Lindsay. Their idea is quiet and strange. The brain does not stamp a memory with a small label reading dreamed, or seen, or heard from a friend. Instead, it makes a judgment, freshly, each time you remember, reading the texture of the memory to decide where it must have come from. The content is stored. The origin is inferred, over and over, every time you look at it. Johnson and Carol Ray described a narrower version of this in a 1981 paper in Psychological Review. Reality monitoring, the work of telling what you perceived from what your own mind produced. Usually the clues are dependable. Things you actually saw come thick with sensory and contextual detail. Things you imagined carry faint traces of the effort of imagining them. Dreams break that rule completely. A dream is generated entirely from inside. Yet it comes flooded with color, sound, weather, the feel of a room, and you never sense yourself making it. It is the one inner event that wears the clothing of a perception. There is a word for content that survives while its origin quietly falls away. Cryptoamnesia. Alan Brown and Dana Murphy demonstrated it in 1989 in the Journal of Experimental Psychology. Learning, memory, and cognition. People taking turns generating examples from a category later claimed above chance, that words spoken by someone else in the room were their own inventions. Nobody was being careless. The memory came back whole. Only its origin was missing. Hold that next to a dream fragment resurfacing months later, weightless, unattached to any night, and you can feel how easily it might be read as knowledge arriving from somewhere ahead. In 1975, Baruch Fischhoff published a study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, Human Perception and Performance, with a title like a small door swinging shut. Hindsight is not foresight. He gave people accounts of historical episodes, told some of them how things turned out, and asked how likely that ending would have looked beforehand. Those who knew the outcome consistently judged it as having been more predictable. Knowing the ending quietly rewrites the beginning. The mind does not experience this as revision. It experiences it as memory, as the calm sense of having seen it coming all along. That rewriting reaches into the smallest details. Elizabeth Loftus and John Palmer showed in 1974 that people who watched a filmed car accident gave higher speed estimates when asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other, rather than hit. In a second experiment, people given the smashed version were more likely, a week later, to report broken glass in a film that contained none. One verb was enough to bend what they saw. Now consider a dream held loosely, half recalled, then met by a real evening that resembles it. Against that, a single verb is nothing. A whole lived hour presses far harder. Loftus went further. With Jacqueline Pickrell, in a 1995 paper in Psychiatric Annals, she gave 24 adults short accounts of childhood episodes gathered from their families, and one that had never occurred: being lost in a shopping mall. About a quarter of them came to remember it, and some furnished it with details nobody had supplied. What the older man looked like, what he said. This is what memory is. Recall is not playback. It is a rebuilding, and every rebuilding is resaved. The dream you described tonight is not the dream you had. It is the dream you have most recently remembered. In 1960, Peter Wason gave people the sequence 2, 4, 6, and asked them to find the rule behind it. Almost everyone tested examples that would confirm the guess they already held. Almost nobody offered one that could prove it wrong. That habit is not a flaw in certain people. It is the ordinary shape of reasoning. And it decides which dreams survive. A dream that lands is told at breakfast, dated, repeated, worn smooth. The thousands that matched nothing are gone before the kettle boils, never recorded. never counted, never held against the hit. Nobody is cheating here. A mind keeps what lands and lets the rest go, which is the only way a mind could work at all. So consider the arithmetic you perform every night without knowing it. A typical night carries roughly 4 to 6 periods of REM sleep, and dreaming appears to run through much of the night besides, which puts a year somewhere in the thousands of dream episodes, each one crowded with fragments. A stairwell, a phrase, a face turning, a particular grey light. Set that against the tens of thousands of ordinary moments a life supplies. The question that opened tonight begins to tilt here. Perhaps we have been asking how a dream could reach forward, when the harder question is what a mind producing this much imagery would have to do to avoid ever matching anything. Per C. D. Oconee and Frederick Mostella put the principle plainly in 1989. In the Journal of the American Statistical Association, with a large enough sample, any outrageous thing is likely to happen. They called it the law of truly large numbers. The clearest illustration is the old birthday problem. Gather just 23 people, and it is better than even odds that 2 of them share a birthday, which feels wrong until you count the pairs rather than the people. Dream fragments work the same way. You are not comparing one dream to one day. You are comparing thousands of fragments to a lifetime of rooms, faces and afternoons. And yet the certainty is so total. That is worth sitting with. Because certainty turns out to be something the brain manufactures rather than something it verifies. Henry Rediger and Kathleen McDermott showed this in 1995. People who studied lists of related words, bed, rest, tired, recalled the linking word sleep, which was never on the list, somewhere between 40 and 55% of the time, depending on the list, and later recognized it with high confidence. The conviction arrived exactly as strong for the memory that was false. Certainty is a feeling the brain generates. It is a signal, not a proof, and there has never been a mind that could tell the difference from the inside. You just heard that a mind can be entirely, calmly sure of something that never happened, and that the sureness feels no different from the sureness that is right. There may be a place in you that resists this, and it is worth being gentle with. Some memories arrive with a shiver, a small cold recognition, as though the night had known something before you did. That feeling is real. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. Notice where in your body it sits. Chest, throat, the backs of the arms. And let it stay there without needing to be settled or explained. Nothing here is asking you to give up anything you have felt. The hours ahead lean further into how such a certainty is made. In 1888, the neurologist John Huglings Jackson published a paper in the journal Brain describing what he called the intellectual aura, continuing a description he had begun a decade earlier. His patients, in the first seconds of a seizure, reported no convulsion at all, but a state of mind, a sudden saturated familiarity, a scene arriving as though it had been dreamed once before. He borrowed a phrase for it: the dreamy state, and nobody has improved on the word since. He believed he was describing a rare clinical curiosity. He was describing the first clear window into a machinery that every human head is carrying, including yours. Tonight. An aura is not a warning that arrives before a seizure. It is the seizure, its opening moments. While the electrical disturbance is still small enough and local enough that the person remains awake inside it and can afterwards say what it was like. That is what made auras extraordinary for medicine. For a few seconds, one small patch of brain announces itself in the only language it has. A taste, a smell, a flush of dread, or an entire dreamed evening rising up whole. The mind, briefly, narrates its own weather from the inside, and someone is there to write it down. Among people with temporal lobe epilepsy, déjà experiences are one of the more frequently reported auras. The figures move around between studies. Something in the range of 1 in 10 to 1 in 5 is often cited, and it depends heavily on how the question is put. Dream-related auras. The sense that what is unfolding now belongs to a dream once had, appear in the same clinical literature, recorded less often and less consistently. These are not laboratory measurements. They are people carefully describing their own inner weather to physicians who, for once in history, were listening closely. Here is the part that must be said plainly, because it is the part that matters most. Déjà experiences are common and entirely ordinary in healthy people. Most adults have had them. What clinicians attend to is never whether the feeling happens, but the company it keeps, whether it arrives many times, in the same stereotyped form each time, alongside other events. An unfamiliar smell, a rising sensation in the stomach, a minute that goes missing. A déjà rêvé on a quiet evening is not a symptom. It is an ordinary brain doing an ordinary thing, in an ordinary head, like every head around it. So, why did an uncommon condition teach us so much about a universal experience? Because it did what no experiment could ethically do. It isolated the region. When a seizure begins in a small, mappable patch of tissue and produces a dreamy state, and a seizure beginning somewhere else does not, the correlation becomes very hard to look away from. Neurology has learned this way for 2 centuries, from the exception that finally makes the rule visible. The mechanism that occasionally misfires in a relatively small number of patients turned out to be the very same one running quietly and correctly in everyone else. So how common is the ordinary version in 2003? Alan Brown gathered the Déjà Vu literature into a single review in Psychological Bulletin. 41 surveys, taken across decades and countries, and found reported rates scattered widely, from roughly a third of respondents to almost all of them, averaging near 2/3. The scatter comes from how the question is worded, who is asked, and what they think you mean. The signal underneath it barely moves. 2 people in 3, in nearly every sample anyone has ever taken, have stood somewhere ordinary and felt the floor of time quietly tilt. the pattern hidden inside those surveys is the one almost nobody expects. Déjà experiences are most frequent in the young, and they decline steadily with age, appearing to peak somewhere in the late teens and 20s, and growing rarer decade by decade afterwards. That is not what you would guess. If the story was simply that old memories pile up until they start colliding. Whatever produces the feeling seems to belong to a brain at its most fluent. A fast, young system, matching hard, running at full speed, generating recognitions faster than it can account for them. Two other things track alongside it. The first is travel. In Brown's review, people who travel more report déjà experiences more often, and the association turns up again and again in samples that have almost nothing else in common. The explanation usually offered is unglamorous and quietly lovely. New places assembled from old parts. A hotel corridor you have certainly never walked, built out of 1,000 corridors you have. The more unfamiliar rooms you step into across a life, the more chances your head gets to catch on something it already holds. The second is state. Fatigue and stress both show up beside déjà experiences in the survey literature. People report them more when tired, pressed, stretched thin, running low. It is a modest, consistent association rather than a dramatic one, and it makes a plain kind of sense. A tired system is a system running with less margin for checking its own work. If you have ever had one of these at the end of a very long day, in a strange city, half asleep on your feet, you were standing in exactly the condition the data describes. A checking system running with the margin taken out of it. And the third association is the one this night has been circling all along. People who remember their dreams report déjà experiences more often than people who do not. That is not a curiosity tucked into a footnote. It is precisely what you would predict if the thing being matched against the present were dream material in the first place, because you cannot recognize a fragment you never kept. The people who catch these strange moments most often are not the people with the longest reach into tomorrow. They are simply the people who carry more of the night into the morning. Dream recall varies enormously between people, and it turns out not to be a matter of trying harder. Jean-Baptiste I. Ken Lube and colleagues, in work published in 2014, compared people who recall dreams nearly every morning with people who recall them once or twice a month. The high recallers spent about twice as long in brief awakenings across the night, and their brains answered sounds more strongly, while awake and while asleep alike. The difference was not in the dreaming itself. It was in the door. How often the night briefly opened wide enough for something to be carried out through it. This is where the question we started with begins to change shape. Nearly everyone dreams. When sleep laboratories have woken self-described non-dreamers in the lab, reports have come back anyway. The dreams were happening. The recall was not. So the difference between someone who has never had a dream seem to come true, and someone who has may not be a difference in what they see coming. It may be a difference in how much of the night they carry out with them. We have been asking whether dreams reach forward. The better question is what they leave behind. Even the texture of it varies. In 2015, Adam Zeman and colleagues, writing in the journal Cortex, named aphantasia, the lifelong absence of voluntary visual imagery in people whose sight and memory are otherwise entirely ordinary. Some of them, remarkably, still report seeing images in their dreams. Whatever builds the pictures of sleep does not run on the same machinery as the pictures you can summon deliberately at will. Some minds dream in color and weather and faces, some in fragments, some in almost nothing at all. Nobody chose their own setting. Everybody has one, and it has been running all along. In 1981, Stephen LaBerge did something that had never been shown in a scientific journal. Lucid dreamers, people who become aware, inside the dream, that they are dreaming, cannot speak, because the body is held still during REM sleep. But the eyes still move. So LaBerge had dreamers agree on a signal in advance, a deliberate pattern of left and right eye movements, and then send it from inside the dream while the recording ran through the night. The signals arrived exactly as agreed. Keith Hearn had caught a similar signal years earlier, outside the journals. Someone, asleep and dreaming, had reached across and knocked on the wall of the waking world. That door opened wider. In 2021, Karen Konko-Lee and colleagues published work in Current Biology drawn from 4 laboratories working independently. On 2 continents, they put questions to sleeping, lucid dreamers. Simple arithmetic. Yes or no. And now and then. Not often, but unmistakably. A correct answer came back, signaled with eye movements and facial muscles, from people verified as asleep. Afterwards, some of the dreamers described how the questions had arrived, woven into the dream itself. A voice from a car radio, words coming out of nowhere at all. A conversation had taken place straight across the border of sleep. And lucidity is not rare. In 2016, David Saunders and colleagues pulled decades of surveys in the journal Consciousness and Cognition and found that roughly half of people report having had at least one lucid dream in their lives, with something like a quarter reporting them monthly or more. Half of everyone. This is the shape the night keeps making, over and over. The experience you quietly assumed was yours alone, or nearly alone, turns out to be sitting unremarked inside every second person you have ever stood beside in a queue. People have been keeping records of all this for a very long time. In the British Museum, there is a papyrus known as Chester Beatty III, written down in Egypt more than 3,000 years ago, and copying material older still. It is a dream book, a long, patient list of dream images, each followed by a reading, good or bad, and what it means. Someone sat with a reed pen and organized the contents of sleep into a system. That impulse is not foreign to you. You have done the smaller version of it yourself, over coffee, telling someone what you saw. In the 2nd century A.D., a Greek named Artemidorus of Daldis compiled the O Nairo Kritika, 5 books on the interpretation of dreams. he was not guessing wildly. He traveled. He interviewed. He collected dreams alongside what happened afterwards. And he insisted that meaning depended on the dreamer, their work, their health, their means, their customs, so that the same image read differently for different lives. In its own way, it is a serious empirical project, assembled with the only instruments the age had. He was trying to find the rule that governs the night. So, tonight, are we? Across the Greek world, people went further than reading dreams. They traveled in order to have them. At the sanctuaries of Asclepius, Ep idav Rus, Kos, Pergamon, the sick would bathe, make an offering, and lie down in a hall called the Abaton, hoping the god would come to them in sleep with a cure. Inscriptions there record what they saw. Thousands made long, difficult journeys to do this, for centuries. Whatever we now say about the mechanism, we should be honest about the impulse. They went to the dream for help, because the dream felt like a place where help lived. Not everyone in the ancient world agreed, and the disagreement was thoughtful. Aristotle, in a short work called On Divination in Sleep, took prophetic dreams seriously enough to argue with them, and came down carefully. Most, he judged, were coincidence, or else the dream and the event shared some common cause. What is striking is not that he was skeptical. It is that he treated the question as worth real argument. That 23 centuries ago, a mind was sitting up with the exact thing you may have sat up with at 4 a.m, and finding it genuinely difficult. The famous cases tend to soften when you look at them closely. Abraham Lincoln is said to have dreamed of a corpse lying in state in the East Room, days before his assassination. The story reaches us almost entirely through his friend Ward Hill Lamont, whose recollection of the conversation was published in 1895, 30 years after the night in question. And 30 years after, everybody knew how the story ended. Historians have questioned it ever since. Nobody needs to have lied for this to happen. A memory carried and retold for 30 years is a memory shaped by 30 years. In October 1966, a colliery spoil tip slid down onto the village of Ab Erfan in Wales and killed 144 people, most of them children in a school. A psychiatrist named John Barker gathered accounts from people who said they had foreseen it, collected some 76, and went on to found a bureau where premonitions could be registered in advance. The detail that matters is quiet. Nearly all of those accounts arrived after the disaster was in every newspaper in Britain. Grief is not evidence, but it is not deceit either. It is people, in the worst week of their lives, looking backward for a reason. In 1927, an aeronautical engineer named J.W. Dunn published An Experiment with Time, and it is a more honest book than its reputation now suggests. Dunn had had dreams that seemed to anticipate events, and rather than simply believing them, he did something genuinely admirable. He began writing his dreams down the instant he woke, before the day could get its hands on them, and urged his readers to do the same. He was reaching for the one thing this entire question needs: a record made before the outcome exists. His conclusions went somewhere strange. His instinct was exactly right. Consider what Dunn was really doing. Waking in the dark and writing before the morning could tidy anything. Trying to catch the night in the few seconds before it got smoothed into a story. Your mind performs that tidying on its own. Every single morning. Without instruction and without ever telling you it happened. It has been doing it while you have been lying here listening. Something is gathering now toward one idea, and it is far gentler than it first sounds. You can stop working at it. Whatever this turns out to be. It was never a task you were failing. What we have been circling all these hours is very close now. When the record is made first, the effect thins. Through the 1960s and 70s, the Maimonides Dream Laboratory in Brooklyn ran studies on dream telepathy and reported positive results. A later review by Simon Sherwood and Chris Rowe found that studies run elsewhere afterwards produced markedly weaker outcomes. The wider pattern repeats itself. In 2011, Daryl Bem published 9 experiments in a leading psychology journal reporting evidence for precognition. Failed replications followed quickly, and a large pre-registered effort across many laboratories found no trace of it. Small effects that shrink whenever the rules are fixed in advance are usually the signature of the method, not of the mind. So here is what it all points to, laid side by side. The dreamed evening and the lived evening are not joined by foresight. They are joined by a filing error. Your brain holds fragments of thousands of dreams with their dates and their origins stripped away. The present arrives. The system finds a match and returns its verdict. You have been here before, without ever reporting where the match was found. Nothing reached forward at all. What happened is that something old was filed under the wrong night. That is not prophecy failing. That is memory working, doing precisely what it does, in every head that has ever slept. And the answer, when it arrives, is disarmingly gentle. The brain believes because belief is simply what familiarity feels like from the inside. No small voice announces that a match has been found. There is only the sensation of already knowing, arriving whole and wordless. The psychologist J.T. Hart named a version of this in 1965. The feeling of knowing. The certainty that something is in you before you can say what it is. You were never fooled. You were told, in the only language that feeling has. And it is worth being kind to that trust, because it is usually earned. Count the times today the same signal was right. Your own front door, a friend's voice on the phone, the handwriting on an old envelope. Thousands of quiet matches, all correct. None of them noticed. A signal that reliable deserves to be believed. The rare night it fires for a dream instead of a memory is not a betrayal of your judgment. It is the same faithful system, doing the same faithful thing. One rule about detectors makes this beautiful. In 1966, David Green and John Sweats set out signal detection theory, showing that any system sensitive enough to catch true signals will sometimes answer to something that merely resembles one. Hits and false alarms come from the same sensitivity. A recognizer that never over-recognizes is a recognizer that recognizes less. Your mind chose sensitivity. So the doorway feeling is what it costs to own a machine good enough to know your life on sight. And the material it matches against is not foreign. When Calvin Hall and Robert van der Castle built the first large catalogue of dream content in 1966, and as G. William Domhoff extended it since, the picture was ordinary, though not as you would guess. Women's dreams lean toward faces they know. Men's lean slightly toward strangers. And familiar rooms turn up less often than you would think. But all of it is assembled from the stuff of a real life. Nothing in there was posted in from elsewhere. You already heard how the night handles your days. It almost never replays an evening from beginning to end. It borrows. A face here. A corridor there. A mood lifted off a real afternoon and set down somewhere it never belonged. Dreaming does not copy your life. It samples it. And a thing assembled from real pieces of your world will, sometimes, resemble your world. That is not a coincidence needing explanation. That is what sampling does. There is even a rhythm to how your days drift into your nights. Researchers including Tore Nielsen report a dream lag effect. Not in every study, and seemingly for the events that mattered. Fragments of waking experience surfacing in dreams not only the night after, but again around 5 to 7 days later. Your dreams have been working through last Tuesday all week. When one of them later brushes against a real room, it is not because the dream knew. It is because the dream was made of rooms like it. In 2000, in the journal Science, Robert Stickgold and colleagues had people play the falling block game Tetris, then studied what appeared as they fell asleep. Many reported the blocks drifting down behind their eyes. The gentle part is what happened with 5 amnesic patients, whose memory damage left them unable to recall having played. 3 of them saw the falling blocks anyway. The experience had gone into them somewhere they could not point to. Your nights are stocked by a life you do not have to remember to have lived. Dreaming also appears to do something useful with all that material. In 2010, in Current Biology, Erin Wamsley and colleagues had people learn their way through a virtual maze, then nap. Only a handful of them dreamed about the task. A corridor, a sense of turning, music from the room. And those few improved afterwards by roughly 10 times more than the sleepers who did not. The dream was not a rehearsal. It was the mind turning the maze over in its hands. Sleep works with what you gave it. Put those pieces side by side and the eeriness quietly drains out. A mind that samples your real days, recombines them nightly for years, and then walks you through a world built from the same rooms and faces. That mind is going to produce a match now and then. Not because it reached forward, because it was always working with your material. Every match it makes is a piece of your own life, recognizing itself in passing. So consider the possibility that the shiver was never a warning. Nothing was sent to you. Nothing was owed to you afterwards. No event you were supposed to prevent. No meaning. You failed to decode. What happened is smaller and warmer than that. A piece of your own life came back through a side door and found the present standing there. The feeling meant, this is yours. You have been here, in some form, before, because you have been alive, and you have been paying attention. People have noticed this recycling for a very long time. In 1900, in the interpretation of dreams, Freud gave a name to something anyone can verify against their own pillow. Day residue. The ordinary scraps of the waking day that show up at night. The stranger's coat. The argument. The unfinished errand. Much of what he built around that idea has been revised or set aside. The observation itself has held for over a century. The night has always been made from the day it follows. And yet, most of it never reaches you. Most of what you dream does not survive the walk to the kettle. Recall collapses in the first minutes after waking, and what you carry out is a survivor, not a record. So the fragments you do keep float free, unnumbered, unlabeled, without the date or the context that would tie them to a Thursday in March. They are exactly the kind of thing a room can match against. They have simply lost their address. This is what makes the feeling arrive without warning. You cannot go looking for the fragment. That is precisely what has been lost. It can only find you. In a doorway, at a table, partway through a sentence someone is saying. And that is why it feels given. It is the one form of memory that behaves like weather. And weather, when it passes over you, was never aimed. Notice that nothing here is being taken from you. The dream happened. You really did see that room, that light, that turn of a face, somewhere in the dark of your own head. The shiver happened too, in your chest and up the backs of your arms. And it was real in the way all feelings are real. Nothing about tonight asks you to give up either one, only to hold them a little differently. The dream was true. It simply was not about tomorrow. And if you have carried that feeling quietly, wondering whether it meant something was wrong with you, or whether it meant something was coming, you can let both of those down now. What was really happening is that your mind, in the middle of an ordinary day, recognized itself. It reached into a night you barely kept and said, "Too fast for words. I know this." Everyone who has ever felt that shiver was handed the same message. You have been made of your own life the whole time. So here is how to hold it. The next time it comes, notice it. Not to solve it, not to record it as evidence, and not to brace against it. Just to feel your own recognizing machinery say hello in the middle of a Tuesday. It lasts a few seconds. It costs you nothing. You are being shown, briefly and without ceremony, that the thing keeping your world familiar is awake, in there, and working. Then let it go, the way you would let a bird go rather than name it. The feeling is not asking for anything. It has no instruction inside it, nothing to be acted on before it fades. Some people write these moments down, and there is real pleasure in that. A small collection of times your own mind surprised you. Keep them for delight, not for proof. A dream kept for pleasure never has to be right. And if the shiver still comes, let it come. It is one of the few sensations that reaches straight past thinking and touches something older. You are allowed to enjoy it. You do not have to decide it is nothing, and you do not have to decide it is everything. It can simply be one of the odd, good things your mind does, like the shape of your own voice inside your head, or the way a song can find you unprepared. Because it is not rare, and it is not yours alone. Tonight, in bedrooms and kitchens, and on late trains, other people are having exactly this feeling and saying nothing about it. Exactly as you have said nothing about it. It goes largely unspoken because it sounds strange out loud, and because it passes before there is time to describe it. But it moves through the species constantly, unmentioned. The most private moment in your head is one of the most common ones on Earth. So you are allowed to find it beautiful. Not sinister, and not a crack in the world. It is what it feels like to be a creature whose mind holds everything it has lived and quietly checks the present against all of it, without ever being asked. That checking is what makes a face, a friend, and a street a home. Once in a while, it reaches too far and touches a dream. That is the price of belonging to your own life. There is even a kind of gift in it. In the introduction, she wrote in 1831, Mary Shelley described the waking dream that gave her Frankenstein. Images that arrived in the dark and stayed. Whatever the night was doing with her fear and her reading and her long, wet summer, it recombined them into something that had never existed. That is the same machinery. It shuffles your real life while you sleep. Sometimes what it makes matches a room. Sometimes it makes a book. And it does not stop. It has been running through this whole hour, quietly filing the sound of my voice, the weight of your body, the temperature of the room. Somewhere in a year from now, a moment might catch faintly on this one and feel oddly familiar. You will not know why. You will just have the sense that this has happened before, which will be true. It happened tonight. It happened here. There is nothing to fix. No practice to take up. No vigilance to maintain. The system that produced the shiver is the same system that will recognize your ceiling in the morning, and it needs no supervision from you at all. It has been keeping your world continuous since before you could speak. It will keep doing it tonight while you sleep, and every night after, without once asking you to help. What is left, when the strangeness lifts, is simply this. You are enormous inside. Years of rooms and faces and weather, folded down and kept. Most of it out of reach, and all of it still yours. The dream you thought had run ahead of you was drawn from that store. It had nowhere else to get its material. Everything it showed you, it had already borrowed from a life you were busy living. The dream was never a warning. It was your own life, handed back to you, slightly out of order. An evening you had already spent, arriving a second time through a door you did not expect. Nothing was coming for you. Something was returning to you. And the shiver you felt in that doorway was not fear of the future. It was your own past saying your name, softly, and a half-beat late. The strangeness had an address all along. In a Toulouse operating theatre, our current touched the temporal lobe, and the sense of a prior dream arrived. Rare, but repeatable with a wire. And when researchers combed through hundreds of dream reports, almost none were faithful replays of a real evening. They were fragments, faces and corridors borrowed from real days and stitched into something new. Those two findings meet in the same place. Something in you keeps everything you have lived, and something in you keeps checking the present against it. That is all the doorway ever was. You came into night carrying a feeling that seemed to come from outside your life. You can put it down as something that came from inside it. What visited you in that doorway was you. If you have ever felt that shiver, a room unfolding just as it had in a dream, you know how strange it is to say out loud. A subscribe helps this reach someone lying awake with that feeling and no one to ask. Thank you for letting me keep you company tonight. Picture a dream you half remember, with no date on it and no edges. Your mind is doing this right now, laying these words against everything you have ever heard. Matching, filing, letting go. Let that same soft matching move through you until you cannot feel where you end and your own life begins. Let the whole of you dissolve into it. Nothing arriving from outside. Nothing to be warned about. Only your life, coming back to meet you. The rooms are opening around you now, half lit, built from what you already have. Your breath has found the rhythm the dark asks for, going out further than it comes in. Let the drift take you the way recognition takes you. Before you notice, you have gone. The Dream Science to Fall Asleep 2 playlist keeps asking why a dream should feel like it arrived first. The next one carries this further and begins where this leaves off, whenever you want it. If your eyes have already closed, let them stay closed. Nothing here needs catching. Rest, no. There is nothing here you need to hold on to. Nothing is coming for you. Everything you have lived is here, coming home. This is Dream Science, made only of you. Good night.